Who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
Any team but the Eagles.
So the Chiefs.
100%.
Okay.
I'm a Giants fan. I absolutely despise the Eagles and their fans.
Okay.
Let's go.
I don't really care about either teams. I just like to ask people.
Who do you got in voice management?
I'm gonna fall off. I wish I did. I think the only name that pops in my head is McElroy. Is he playing in that?
He is.
But
He's not doing too hot.
that's right. I still want him to win.
All right.
So
So do I. I put a little bit of money on it.
Oh, sorry, buddy. All right. So don't take betting advice from him. So, all right. So let's go into today. We're going to go into lipid digestion. Stay with me. There's a lot of steps, and there's purposes behind lipid digestion. The other thing that we're going to stop at one point, because then when we go into next week, we're going to go into the formulation, utilization of lipoproteins. So we'll stop there. So it's not going to be too long today in that sense. So let's think of something fun and exciting.
Mac and cheese.
Mac and cheese.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Every time, maybe without fail.
And then this is all the cheese on the Mac, okay?
Yeah, let's go.
We're doubling up on that. We're doubling
White
up on the
cheddar mac and
cheese.
cheese?
No, this is it. This is white cheddar.
Let's go.
All right. So he's getting ready to eat mac and cheese. I want you, when I explain this stuff, especially when we're about to go into the cephalic stage, I want you to the point to where you're so annoyed of going over it. When you're so annoyed that I'm going over it again, it means because it's so in depth in your brain, you don't have to think about it anymore, right? So, first thing he's thinking about, he's going to go home. What is he going to make? Double white cheddar mac and cheese. What's happening?
Thinking. It's not thinking.
Close.
Just sit throwing at people is more fun.
Ooh, look at this one. This one's time. All right. He's going home. He's like, I'm going to make the best mac and cheese ever. Kraft. Cool. So then he gets in the door. He sees the box. So sight, right? He opens up the box and then he smells the most delicious chemical-bound fake cheese ever.
Let's go. It was carcinogen.
And then he finally gets it done, and he doesn't wait for it to cool down because no one ever does, and he burns his mouth, and then he tastes it.
Yeah. Let's go.
All right. Now, how do we shut this system off? SNS system, right? Cool, right? It's so embedded in your brain, you just know it. Now, I definitely said that. It's Friday, so you're going to hear some weird things coming out of my mouth today. So, what do we need to release, or what is going to release to start breaking down these fats?
Salivary amylase.
No. Trick question, Haas. So, it's not amylase anymore, right? There is carbohydrate, so it could be. But in this perspective, what do we want to break down? The fats. Now, when we talk about breaking down the fats, we talk about this hydrocarbon, right? So ideally, this right here is a glycerol, right? There's actually hydrogens here. Food for thought. When we make triglycerides, because remember, 90% of the things we consume is triglycerides, okay? And that's all going to start coming into fruition at some point. So when we make the triglyceride, and ideally we're already consuming it because it's already made, we don't use those hydrogens because we make water as a byproduct. So with this, when we talk about, and this could just be an R chain, whatever, and for the sake of this, I'm just going to draw it as a fatty acid. When we go to break these triglycerides, and we've talked about this already, we just haven't talked about where. Where do we break these triglycerides? Remember hormone-sensitive lipase? When we're doing lipolysis, at what bond do we break this triglyceride? The ester bond, which is right here from the oxygen to the carbon. And when we break the ester bond, we use water to do so. So it'll throw the hydrogen back on this glycerol molecule, and it takes away these free fatty acids. We'll go into that. But I want you to make sure that you're comfortable with that, because that's important. Okay?
Can you repeat everything you just said really quick?
100%. So, ester bonds, we break the ester bond, which is essentially just the oxygen to the carbon, that bond that separates the glycerol to the free fatty acids. Okay? And that's it. And a byproduct of us formulating is water. So we use water to break the bond, and it just throws the hydrogens back on. It's the only difference. It's just reverse stepping it, okay? Let's use some green. So, now, what was that molecule that we utilize to break down these fats?
Salivarium.
Lingual lipase. No, get that out of your brain.
I'm sorry.
I'm just going to decipher as LL. Well, I'll put lipase. Lingual lipase, right? Lingual. Now, here's the trick to this. This lingual lipase doesn't really break down triglycerides in adults. No. Mainly children. Why would you think so? Bosom milk. That's it. And bottled milk too, if they don't decide to do that. Children need it at a higher prevalent rate because they're 99% drinking fats. So children need lingual lipase. In adults, it's very ineffective. But we still have to mention it because we still have to say it because it does release, but it's a very minute amount. All right. So now, let's go to this gastric phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here, let's see this green. So, what is the upper part of the stomach? Say it loud, say it proud.
Is the fundus?
Fundus. What's the middle part?
Body.
Body. What's the bottom part? The antrum. What's this called up top? Down here, going into the duodenum? Pylorus. And this is the sphincter, right? Sphincter. All right, cool. So, we get this primarily triglycerides. Primarily triglycerides. We also have cholesterol esters, which all it is a cholesterol molecule with an ester, which is essentially part of a carboxyl. No big deal. That's it. And then phospholipids. Guess what a phospholipid is? It's a triglyceride with a phosphate on it. That's it. So it's not crazy. Like, don't get overcomplicated. Phospholipid. Cool. We're good. So, but when we break down with enzymes, we primarily focus on triglycerides. Okay? When we think about breaking down, we primarily focus on triglycerides. Now, bring me back here. We have triglycerides. We have a big bolus at this point of fats. This giant bowl of this cheesy, chemical-driven mac and cheese, right? Because he didn't take the time to buy his own cheese and melt it onto the mac and cheese. He wouldn't do that. He just opens up a box, right? Am I lying?
Yeah, depends on the day.
He ain't lying. He's tired right now. He ain't got time for that. He probably didn't even really boil the mac and cheese. He just
Eat out
eats
the
it.
box.
That's it. That's it. Don't even melt the cheese. Forget it. We don't have time for that. So,
Just not the powder,
it's the only way to do it. All right. I was like, man, I just gave it to you. G-cell, right? Got me thinking about stirring cheese. So, we have this big bolus of food in our stomach. What is happening right now? What is being signaled? How do we signal this G cell?
Isn't there the expanding of the stomach or something?
Distension, right? Distension is signaling this gastric system. Now, question on your test. What shuts this system off?
Sorry.
What?
The SNS?
Uh-uh. Remember?
No, I don't.
Somatostatin. The SNS can, but I want you to remember somatostatin.
Lipid
So-
digestion?
Gastric phase, somatostatin. We're going back to day one right now. So, we're getting this bolus in the antrum, right? This G cell, what are the two cells we spoke about primarily that are on the stomach?
The chief cell?
And what else? Chief cell, they're gonna win, that's why. Parietal cell, right? We don't have to worry about this. We know HCl, right? That's our main component here. We'll get in that later. Chief cell. What was it responsible for? What did we talk about? We talked about pepsinogen, right? Now we're talking about fats. What do you think it's responsible for releasing? What lipase though?
Gastric lipase?
Yeah, man!
Then the G cell is what tells the product. The G
Well, what's
tells-
this hormone?
Oh, gastric?
There you go. If you guys didn't know this, you could critically think that. Gastric lipase, right? You guys got this. So, and again, is it really abundant in adults?
No.
Really. Can it break down some triglycerides? Yes. Is it extremely effective? No. Okay? We good there? You guys feel comfortable with that so far? Lingual lipase? For babies. Gastric lipase? For babies. But gastric is more prevalent than lingual. Cool? Okay. So now we're getting ready to go into the intestinal. I'll leave him up there. He's looking good.
What is that?
Mac and cheese.
That's mac and cheese, bro.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So that's our pyloric sphincter. We're getting ready to go into the stomach. So we have this big bolus here. Remember, it's doing retropulsion, right? So it's moving and grooving. We're sending signals.
About to be churning and burning.
About to be churning and burning. A new color here. Really excited about it. It's a liver. No, it's like an eagle's green. Kind of just made me mad all of a sudden.
Yeah, I can
This piece
cheese.
of bread is a pancreas. All right. So, this giant bolus, now we're going to talk about it as solely just a fat, right? We're going to isolate it. This giant bolus that's coming in here is now a fat droplet. It's full of triglycerides, it's full of cholesterol, cholesterol esters, and phospholipids. So, this big,
Wait, it's full of triglycerides and what are the?
cholesterol esters, and phospholipids.
Thank you.
So, this fat globulin, right, this big chunk of fatness, can we get it through this aqueous environment in our stomach? No, because oil and water doesn't mix. We know that, right? It does not mix. So it's sitting on this aqueous environment in the stomach. Because mind you, right, we're a lot of water. Depending on what book you read, 88%, 92%, 76%, whatever. We're a lot of water. When we get this big fat globulin into our stomach, into our duodenum, what is stimulating what to then stimulate a bunch of other whats? The chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors, right? Then those chemoreceptors are going to stimulate what cool homie from the eye cell? CCK. Dude's a hero, man. CCK is then going to do what? What would you think CCK does? Besides everything.
It's gonna make the gallbladder squeeze.
All right, we're going to go to the gallbladder. Hold that thought. We're coming back to you. Where else are we going to go? Pancreas. To what? What cell? Acini. Where else is it going? The liver to what? To release bile salts, right? Where else do you think it's going to go? One more place. No. The sphincter of Oddi, right? Because it has to release that common biliary duct. Otherwise, it just sits in the pancreas. I try to be color coded. Yeah, leave it alone. All right. So what I want us to know, first and foremost, we have this big fat globulin. We now have signaled CCK via the eye cell. We're now starting to stimulate all of these things. Let's put it in there. Let's use this screen. So, enzymes that are coming in here. Phospholipase. Cholesterol ester hydrolase. And then it's going to P for pancreatic lipase. Write these down because I'm going to erase them. These are the 3 enzymes that are released from the liver. Phospholipase. What do you think that's going to break down? Phospholipids. Cool, that's it. Cholesterol ester hydrolase. Cholesterol. Primarily, it wants to break down those ester bonds off of the cholesterol. And then pancreatic lipase. Triglycerides, right? Cool. These are relevant, but they aren't prevalent. Prevalent. Yeah, prevalent. I like to make up new words when I can't speak. So, the key factor, they're still going to break down the cholesterol esters, and the phospholipids, but not to anywhere as much as it's going to break down the triglycerides. It's not because they're less effective, it's because there's so many more triglycerides than there is anything else. Okay? So if we think about volume, RDA for cholesterol is 300 milligrams a day. We consume probably, on an average, his one bowl of mac and cheese is probably 3,000 milligrams of triglycerides. So we need more lipase than we do need anything else. All right, I'm going to get that out of my way. Where are we at? We're blue. So, first and foremost, and there's a pecking. What do you mean?
I just wrote those words in a bad spot.
And what?
Are you gonna go?
Oh, you wrote them in here? That's okay.
Yeah.
We're just keep to the left of them. We're gonna come back around. I just did it to make space. That crack always messes me up. And we already know crack kills, and I don't like it. So I try to stay, but then I get all jammed up back here and it gets me uncomfortable. So we're good. Just leave them there. You're fine. I'm gonna cruise this way anyway. So what's gonna happen here? We're gonna start with the gallbladder. Like Kenny was saying, this CCK comes up to the gallbladder and gives it nice friendly hugs. It's like, the gallbladder. Inside of this gallbladder is phospholipids. Primarily, as long as you remember phospholipids, I'm fine with that. Lecithin is the bigger or the most abundant of those phospholipids, right?
Wait, what's the most abundant of them?
Lecithin. See you, man. I said it great the first time. Remember phospholipids. So these phospholipids, are emulsifiers, right? Because the first step is emulsification, is amphiphatic. That means, well, let me get squiggly. When a molecule is amphiphatic, that means it has the ability to bind to fat sides and it has the ability to bind to water. So it's hydrophilic and it's hydrophobic. That's amphiphatic. That's what these bile salts are. So this phospholipid comes up to this big fat globulin, and remember, mind you, this is hydrophobic, right? Because it won't mix in the water. So our whole premise is to get this down to here. We needed to go, it's not doing that right now. So the phospholipids comes and binds onto the lipid bilayer, and then it starts making it more water soluble. Okay? So it's allowing it to go down into this aqueous environment because it's taking this hydrophobic end and making it hydrophilic. Okay? That's how it's getting into this aqueous environment. And at the same time, while it's going to start doing that, we have this other cool homie named bile salts, which is made out of what primarily? Cholesterol. What did you say? You're right, but you're just not going to be right on the test. So, bile is primarily made out of cholesterol. Man, I cannot stress to you enough on how cholesterol is just so misunderstood and so demonized. And it's used, like you can't make a hormone without, anyway, don't get me started. I don't want to get off on a tangent. Anyway, so now, as this thing is starting to go, bile salts will come down. So, I don't want to, let's do it, yeah, let's try it. So primarily what I want you to remember about bile salts, there's cholic acid. That's the primary one I want you to remember. Then there's chenodeoxycholic acid. If you don't remember chenodeoxycholic acid, I'm not mad at you. As long as you remember cholic acid. That's the primary bile salt. The other cool thing, and yeah, I'll wait. So, this cholic acid bile salt will come as this is starting to penetrate this aqueous environment. It comes on here and it does the same thing. But as it's doing this, it's taking this big fat globulin and making fatty droplets. You have to write that down. It's making fatty droplets. And they're still surrounding it, so it can go in this aqueous environment. So it has all these bile salts around it still. And each one has the same, oh, get off me, come on. I'm not gonna write in every one of them because that's just redundant. But each one of them still has triglycerides, cholesterol, esters, and phospholipids, right? All it's doing is starting to break it up in little droplets. Because, mind you, our whole point and everything that we do, excuse me, Celsius, and a peanut butter jelly, everything that we do, and the whole premise of what we do, is we break it down to build it back up. What? It happens.
No, it's okay. It just seems like your brain glitched for half a second.
It does it all the time. Yeah.
Same.
Normal. It's not an issue, it's just, sometimes it's an issue. So, now, we're breaking, not, and I don't want to say, no, never mind, we're not breaking it down. We're starting to split this Big Mac Daddy up into little brothers and sisters. Because the whole premise on everything that we do is to break it down and then build it back up, and then break it down and build it back up, right? That's everything we do. We want to take, just for terminology wise, this polymer set and break it down into monomers, right? Same thing we went over with carbohydrates. So, now that we have these fatty acid droplets, these little smaller versions of this Big Mac Daddy over here, the cool thing about cholic and deoxycholic, it uses taurine and glycine to build a receptor. You don't have to remember that. Just remember that it uses an amino acid. And this receptor, what do you think this receptor is called? Take a wild guess what it would be called. Co-lipase. So, I drew it over here, this lipase. This lipase is a ninja. He is just straight ninja. That's him kicking right there. And he goes, right? So when this co-lipase comes up, this pancreatic lipase now has the ability to come in here and kick the shit out of triglycerides. And where does he break it down? At the ester bond. So what do we get now? So we're going into all these little fatty droplets and we're breaking down triglycerides. So then we get free fatty acids, we get glycerol, and there's one more thing that we get. Monoacylglycerol. What is that? It's a glycerol molecule that has one fatty acid on it. Okay? Now, this is where it just gets, it keeps getting cooler and cooler and more confusing. So mind you, we're cruising. We're in the jejunum now, right? Because we're cruising as all this is happening. We're in the jejunum right now because, mind you, remember, the majority of digestion happens in the jejunum. These get repackaged because the bile salts are still doing the same thing. Smaller, 100 times smaller now from the droplets. Without the bile salts surrounding these molecules, it will just float back up. Okay? It needs bile salts. So we now take these constituents into smaller molecules. Same thing, bile salts are still surrounding these guys. But yes, it's just wild. We got homies that want to come hang out. Who do you think those homies would be? Fat soluble vitamins. A, D, E, and K. They now join the party. So now we have free fatty acids, glycerol, monoacylglycerol. We still have triglycerides because we're not going to break up all of them, right? We still have cholesterol, cholesterol ester, and phospholipids. But we have accumulated bazillions of these smaller what? What is that now called? Me cells. Me cells. We now have me cells. These smaller constituents are me cells. You guys heard of that before? Yeah.
I think you were talking about it on Wednesday too.
I did. I mentioned that for sure. It's spelled like micelle. Me cells. If you say micelle, I don't care too. Micelle. None of us speak Latin or Greek, so you can make up whatever you want. That's why people are like, it's pronounced like this. You speak Latin? I didn't think so. Actually, one of my old trainers used to speak Latin. He used to correct me all the time. I'm like, oh, you speak Latin. I get it. All right, anyway. So these me cells are small enough to do what?
In between the phospholipid bilayer.
to get into the, starts with an E. Enterocyte.
Nah.
You were there. I know you were going with that. So these me cells now can go into the enterocyte. But wait, it's not over yet, Tony. Guess what they do? Okay. Sorry guys, that's what 40 looks like. It's real. When it goes to the enterocyte, because the whole premise, remember, is to get all the way to the bottom. Now these small enough cells can. When it gets to this enterocyte, through passive diffusion, it can go right through the cell. So cool. Doesn't need any energy, doesn't need help, doesn't need a co-transporter. It just goes right through the cell. When it goes into the enterocyte, it just dumps it into the enterocyte. That's all it does. And then that process, once it's in the enterocyte, is done. It has all these constituents in the enterocyte. Now, what you need to know is that 94%, remember, because it has bile salts on all this stuff, right? 94% of bile salts go back to the liver to be reused again. That's cool. No one's excited about that?
That's so cool.
Yeah. Fake it. I'll take it. Shit, I don't care. Get some excitement. Go bile salts. We got a cheer made up for bile salts?
I'll give this one.
All right, fair enough. Okay, cool. All right, so now, humor me here. Humor me. We're now in the enterocyte. We're in a cell. Yes, ma'am.
Before we go on, when you were drawing there's like the big fat thing and then like the little fat droplets on the big one, the black that you use to.
The black is
line
the
it.
bile salt. It's the colic acid.
What's the other? I got the biosalts.
Phospholipids
Okay.
from the gallbladder.
Thank you.
Yep. So, we're in the enterocyte now. Let's think about day one. Going back to day one, we have fats. What do we need to, remember, because we break down to build back up, right? We can't send that through the system. It doesn't work like that. What do we have to do to all of these constituents? We have to build it back up. What do we build it back up in? You said that? Smooth or rough? Why? That's it, right? Smooth ER. Because he's cool. Smooth ER. Now, this is where it starts getting really cool. So in the smooth ER, we package this, I call him the hoss. He's the hoss. We package this hoss up. We now send it over to what? Not yet. The rough ER. Why would you think that? What do we do in the rough ER? We add a protein. So now we take this big mamma jamma, who is now triglycerides. Check this shit out, this is so cool. It's triglycerides, cholesterol, cholesterol esters, phospholipids, and A, D, E, and K. So we legitimately broke it down to rebuild it back up the same. Don't ask me why. Don't you question God. This is what happens. So then after this, we added a protein to it. Cool. It transcribed itself. It went to the Golgi. package it all nice and neat, and then this hoss is now complete. You have majority triglycerides. I'll tell you what that is because I don't think you can see it. I'm sorry. I'll write it in black. You have majority triglycerides. This is a chylomicron now. Chylomicron. I was going to ask you, but I figured I'd just ruin the surprise. Primarily triglycerides. You have cholesterol, cholesterol ester, phospholipids, A, D, E, and K. We have a protein, ApoB48. Please remember that. ApoB48. What makes this chylomicron now?
Pylomicron?
Chylo, with a C. It's a lipoprotein. A chylomicron is a lipoprotein. What don't we notice a lot in this chylomicron? What do we blame everything for? What do we use as a crutch for our obesity and heart disease and everything
Cholesterol?
else? Is there a lot of cholesterol in that cell?
No.
Weird, right? What's
Great.
primarily in that?
Triglycerides.
What do you think stepping on the gas pedal? What do you think a triglyceride is made up of?
Fats.
And? No, not triglycerides. What is it made up of? It's a sugar and fats. What's stepping on the gas pedal right now? And fats. You see where I'm going with all this? And we're blaming cholesterol?
What to do with that?
Oh, we'll figure out on Wednesday for sure, because then we're gonna see exactly where this goes. All right, cool. So we got the hoss here, right? We got this chylomicron with a protein, which is now a lipoprotein. Can we just throw this puppy in the blood? No, why?
I don't have an answer to that part.
Cool. Because it's still a fat. It still has to transfer through certain mechanisms. Remember when we looked at the microvilla, interior-wise, we generally showed veins. What else was sitting right next to that? Starts with an L. Lacteals. Write this down. The chylomicron will go into the lacteals, into the lymphatic system, and then it goes to the brachiocephalic. That's when it gets into the bloodstream. There's a couple other processes we don't need to know about right now. That's it.
The one right before it goes in the bloodstream?
Lacteals, lymphatic. So lymphatic transfers a lot of our fats. And then the brachiocephalic. That's green. So, this big chylomicron went through the brachiocephalic. Went to the brachiocephalic. The whole premise is to make its way back to the liver, right? It's what it needs to do. It has a protein on it. It's going to run into two guys. And this is important to understand. Bless you. high density lipoprotein. I'm gonna throw this in your brain right now. We're gonna go way more in depth on it on Wednesday. Bless me, child. High density lipoprotein. He is so cool. We always assume him of grabbing cholesterol. You know what this homie does? He gives us other proteins. He gives us an ApoC2 and an ApoE. Who cares if you don't remember it right now? But this ApoC2 has a very strong affinity for a molecule called lipoprotein lipase. That guy there is what's going to break these triglycerides up. Okay? That's where I'm going to leave you with this. Come Wednesday, we're now going to take this chylomicron, we're going to run it through the liver 3.5 different times, and then we're going to end up as a foam cell. That's where we're going to go with it. And that's what we call atherosclerosis. It's just...
So, where is that now?
That guy is in the bloodstream right now.
Okay, so that little thing is.
This, yeah, this is right here is the brachiocephalic.
Okay.
That's where we go through, and now we're in the bloodstream. We're going to try to make our way back to the liver. Okay?
And it came from.
It came through the jejunum, through a lacteal, in the lymphatic system, probably through my armpit, up here to the brachiocephalic, and now we're out of the brachiocephalic. Okay? And the reason why we have to do that is he thick. He real thick. He can't be just running through veins and stuff. Big old butt. Yeah. Proteins hanging off the side of him and all. It's too much mac and cheese. So, ready? Do it again. Mac and cheese time. Extra cheese. Hold the mac. Comes in. Cephalic system, right? He sees it. He thinks about it. He chews it. And he tastes it. It's so delicious. Nom, 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 nom. Lingual lipase. Doesn't do much. In babies, all day long. We're good. Goes into the gastric system. Distension sets off the G cell from the antrium. The G cell then sends up gastrin to the chief cell. The chief cell says, release the gastric lipase. It's somewhat effective. It's going to break down some of these ester bonds and triglycerides. Not very much though. So now we have this bolus of food that comes into the duodenum through the pyloric sphincter, right? Now, this fat globulin full of triglycerides, cholesterol, cholesterol esters, phospholipids. Remember, it's just a cholesterol molecule, 36 carbons, with an ester. Phospholipids is pretty much like a triglyceride or a fatty acid with a phosphate. That's it. It gets into here. It pushes against the walls. It stimulates the chemoreceptors. That chemoreceptor says to the eye cell, release CCK. CCK comes and just vomits all over the liver and the pancreas. Stimulates the acini cells to release enzymes, pancreatic lipase, phospholipase, and then cholesterol ester hydrolase. Cool. So we're going to start trying to break some of this stuff down. But before that, we need to emulsify it so we can get it into the aqueous environment. We got to go bloop, 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 bloop. Otherwise, it's never going to make it to the enterocyte. But as this is happening, we're moving through the system, right? We're cruising down into the jejunum. First things first, the bile from the gallbladder, which is primarily phospholipids, will come into the play. We'll start emulsifying this big fat globulin to start sinking it down. As it starts going into the aqueous environment, the cholic acid, with the help of taurine and glycine, will come down here, will do the same thing, but at the same time that's doing that, it's capturing these little fat droplets and starting to break them up. Still same contents, just smaller, right? Because it's more palatable when it's smaller. Otherwise, if it's too big, we're never going to break it down. So, colipase is the enzyme. It needs to be on there with the help of those amino acids for pancreatic lipase, the ninja, to come up in here and break those triglycerides up. Primary responsibility. It breaks down the triglycerides And there's a couple cholesterol esters, phospholipids that break down too. But then as they're breaking up, we need to repackage them into smaller constituents. Because if it's too big, it's never going to make it into the enterocyte. Because it can't passively fuse or passively go through. So it breaks that down. But as it's doing that, we capture some of our fat-soluble vitamins. And we throw them in the mix. Because they're homies. We take them to party. They're down. They're going to go watch the flag football game. They're cool. So they hit the enterocyte, primarily in the jejunum. Once it gets through the enterocyte, it goes, see ya. They all split up in the enterocyte. These bile salts that were doing that got it all the way down into the enterocyte, make its way back to the liver. 94% of it does that, right? The other, we boo-boo out, okay? So, we have all these constituents, goes into the smoothie R, packs them all up to a big hoss-like material, goes into the rough ER, throws a protein on it, right? That's transcription. Go to the Golgi, finishes all up, bakes it, makes it all nice and cute, puts a little cherry on top. Now we have a chylomicron with an ApoB48 protein on it, which makes it a lipoprotein, primarily triglycerides. And my point, and then I'm going to send home as a magician, primarily Wednesday, is without all these triglycerides, you're going to have a lot less chylomicrons. I'll leave that with you on that one. So anyway, then it goes into the lacteals, through the lymphatic system, up to the brachiocephalic, into the bloodstream. Once it's in the bloodstream, it's running into all these HDLs. HDLs is throwing over proteins, so this way we can start breaking down these chylomicrons into, and again, we're going to break them down, smaller again, into what we will call a chylomicron remnant. And then we're going to go to VLDL, IDL, LDLs. Woo! Woo! Cool? Easy money. Unless you bet on McElroy. You never know, he might come back. He ain't coming back.